Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and I have the pleasure for this episode to have a guest all the way from Canada, Casey Gray. And first of all, Casey, thank you so much for being here with us and taking the time to be on the podcast. And as I always do with all of our guests, I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me here, Brian, all the way on the other side of the world. So, a little bit about myself. Born and raised here in Canada. We live in Ottawa, in a little town, actually, Manotick, that's part of Ottawa, but on the outskirts. And I've kind of been all over the city in my life here, but have not left Ottawa other than the usual travel. I'm married, happily married. We're about to celebrate our 8th anniversary, actually, but we've been together over 15 years. So it'll be our 8th wedding anniversary. We have one son who is my greatest teacher because he does what I do, not what I say. I'm a licensed carpenter by trade. That's what I went to school for, but I don't do much carpentry anymore. I'm essentially an entrepreneur running my business and having fun creating content, educating people in the construction world, and put most of my time right now towards business and just things are going really well, even amid the pandemic and COVID and so forth. People seem to be wanting to get their houses built and renovated. So there's no shortage of work right now, that's for sure. So a lot of good things happening there. So my experience has been in business 10 years, over 10 years at this point, but been in construction over 17 years. And I guess on the personal side, when I'm not working, I have a 1977 Volkswagen Westfalia that has been in the shop this year because when COVID hit, we decided to renovate it. So I brought it, we gutted it, brought it there, and we haven't got it back yet because I just told them to fix everything. Call me when it's done, but I've been so busy anyway. It's probably a good thing I don't have it back. And so I usually would be doing camping in that and or kayaking or doing something outdoors. And yeah, I guess that's me in a nutshell, family, outdoors, and work.
Yes, wonderful. And would you be able to tell me a little bit? I know, like, I've been reading a little bit, and um, how come you came to actually your business now, Conscious Builder? What led you in that path? Like you said, you were like working in construction, but that wasn't always the case with like doing it consciously. What led you in that path?
Yeah, the conscious building career, let's call it, started about 8 years ago. So I worked for somebody else for 7 years. Worked great company, learned a lot. Was started running jobs really young, but I decided to go on my own after about 7 years. And like every other, mid 20-year-old, you just want to go out, make some money, do a good job, and build a name for yourself. And that's kind of the focus at that point, right? And that's the goal. And it wasn't until about 2 years after we started the business that we had a little bit, I say we, because it was my wife and I together, we've been on this journey together. We had a little bit of an awakening. And it started with a book that I had purchased for my wife called The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. And within that book, although it wasn't necessarily that book that sparked it, I read that book after, but when I bought it for my wife, she read it. And within that book, there was mention of Tony Robbins. And I don't know if you've been to Tony Robbins events or anything, but she ended up looking him up because of that book. Because she's like, oh, I remember Tony Robbins from the infomercials from my grandparents when I was a kid. So she looked him up, found out about a program called Unleash the Power Within, and said, hey, Casey, do you want to go to this seminar? I said, sure. I didn't ask any questions. I'll go. And that event changed our lives because it changed our thinking. Change your thoughts, change your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we left that event like drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, right? That's the joke whenever you go to events like that. And it was good Kool-Aid, to say the least, right? We changed a lot, and that was the beginning of what got us to where we are at this point. But what that was it brought awareness to the way we were living and helped us realize that we do have control, right? I remember comment that one of the carpenters that I learned from, he said, it's not my fault. I'm a product of my environment. And when he had said it, it was just funny. It was a joke. He was doing, I can't remember what he was doing, but it was said in a way like, oh, I can't be responsible for what I just did, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until many years later that I realized how much truth that statement has, because we are all products of our environment. However, we get to choose the environment that we want to put ourselves in, or the environment that we want to surround ourselves with. And that comes in many forms. And then after that, we started thinking differently. I started asking the question, why? Why am I building? What do I want to do? How do I want to stand out? What do I want to leave behind? And when not long after that, we found out we were pregnant with Sullivan. And that's when I started thinking beyond myself after that, right? We started thinking health, but then as soon as you realize that there's going to be a little person looking up to you, then everything changes. And you're like, all right, if I'm going to tell this person to be and do whatever he can be, or whatever he wants, I have to do the same, right? I have to lead by example. And that's when the Conscious Builder started to come into focus. And it wasn't the name. It was originally our slogan, our tagline that we started to use for the company. And then we eventually turned it into the company name and podcast name and YouTube channel.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like for us and with conscious action, everything comes from that awareness. Like that's why like we focus a lot on like raising awareness to get people to understand why they are doing the things that they are doing. And then it's the how, then it's the action. And it's interesting that you say like that change of awareness, change of perspective, because that is what will bring about the changes. And it's really interesting. You were just saying Tony Robbins. I've been actually like the last 2 days, every once in a while I come back to something about Tony Robbins, and I started watching like again, and it's like he's like this magnet, right? Like he draws you in, and he's like, come on, and it's powerful, and it makes you like sometimes cut through the bullshit that we have, and that change of perspective, like it's really interesting because it is what enables one to actually like look back and see like, am I doing what I want to be doing the way that I want to be doing it? And I think that the more that we wake up to what we actually want, we start realizing that the way that the world is working doesn't work for all of us, and it's like really commendable to be able to have that epiphany and then actually doing the change. And with that, I want to ask you what, because I have my preconceived ideas about the construction companies and like all of that industry, and I don't
We all
think
do.
that I think that it's one of the worst ones in terms of sustainability and that. What has changed for you in terms of that? Like, what are the aspects that you see that are like, oh, we need to make changes here?
Well, I think the biggest thing, at least where we live, we have extreme weather, right? So we have extreme heat and humidity and extreme cold and dryness in the winter. And one of the biggest things is obviously heating and cooling our homes here, right? So if a home can be more efficient, then it will be better for the environment. But also there's a big product side of things too. What we do here is like, we call it the conscious builder because consciousness, as we were just talking about, is a state of awareness. And if we're not aware, we can't make a change. We can't do something different because we're just not aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we see our role as more of an educator. Yes, we do renovations and we do custom homes and videos and so forth. But the idea is, we want to educate people so that they're aware of the possibilities out there. By doing so, we continue to educate ourselves as well, because there's always new products, there's new things. We're not going to pretend that we know everything. We are learning, and we're taking what we've learned and we're putting it out there for other people. So the biggest thing, first of all, I want to say is that people vote with their wallet, so to speak, right? If you go to the grocery store and you continue to buy food that is not healthy for you, the grocery store will continue to stock food that is not healthy for you. So if you want to see more organic produce, for example, in your grocery store, go and buy the organic produce, because then the grocery store will bring more in, because they track all of that, right? They're going to bring in more of what sells and get rid of what doesn't sell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same for everything. If you want to see better built homes, you have to go out and actively pursue better built homes. So the biggest thing is we all think that we can't make a difference, but we can by making those decisions to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's hard. It's easier said than done. It's expensive. I get it. That's why we don't preach that you have to build a certain way, or you have to renovate this way, or use this product or whatever. We just put the information out there, and we understand that people have a budget and there's only so many things you can do, and you work with what you have. But if you can do a little bit now and a little bit more later, and like every little bit counts. So if we can make our homes more energy efficient, that will help us. Now, homes are getting more efficient, right? They are getting more comfortable. Like the building code is changing, at least here where we are. So we do see that increase, but it's not going as fast as we need it to go. The other factor is that there are technologies that are helping us too, right? Solar panels are getting more affordable. They are becoming more efficient too, so they can produce more electricity. Because a lot of things, I don't know where you are, what the heating demands and cooling demands are, but a lot of the biggest energy consumptions in our houses now, especially the houses that are built better, come down to hot water, which has nothing to do with how your house is built. That's just how you use the hot water in your house, as well as plug loads, which comes down to fridges and dishwashers and electronics, right? If you have a family that has 7 TVs and 7 laptops and 7 cell phones and 7 iPads, like all those things are charging, and then an electric car, which helps the environment, but it's still pulling on the grid too. Like all these things, how we live comes into play as well. So it's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but it's not just one thing. I think it's everything, and if we can make little changes here and there, it will add up to big changes.
Yeah, and I want to touch on what you were just saying, that we don't preach one thing because it doesn't fit for everyone. And I know that here, like in the last couple of years, I've been following, what's happening with the earth domes and what's happening with tiny houses. But usually those are passion projects, like that people have. Like it's not the normal thing. It's not what the majority of the population goes for. And the majority of the population goes for fast and cheap. And like where, like in terms of that, which is for the majority of people, what can there be, like what's the thing that will make the change? It's that the change in the code, or perhaps it's like changing some of the materials that are still cheap but seeing like a more sustainable material.
So I don't know. That's a big question. It's probably going to vary depending on where you live, right? So I can speak for where we live. People like bigger houses. They like space, right? So there's no tiny home movement in Ottawa, right? So and 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 tiny home movements, although they hear about the van life and all sorts of stuff, but people like their space. They like, especially if there's a big family, they need, especially with COVID, that's what's happening, is that more people are living at home now. So they're actually, the ones who had the space are grateful that they had the space, because everyone's working. So they need a home office. They might need 2 home offices, right? So that the mom and dad can work in the office, and then the 3 or 4 kids have places to work, places to be. So the people that are in smaller houses are now wanting additions or needing to expand, right? So here where we live, you can't be outside all the time, right? You can have an outdoor space for part of the year, but it's not like we can extend our space outdoor in the winter. It just doesn't work like that. So that question will definitely depend. So I think there's a couple things that need to change. Yes, people need to change the way that they live. I think that's the biggest thing, but we can't do that. We have habits, right? So in order to create habits, we now have new habits because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But to some extent, we need to be aware of how we live so that we can change what's not working and implement what is working. But there is going to be a big policy change too. So what we do is we kind of build for the 1% of the 1%, right? So the people that are thinking the way that we think, but also can afford what we do. Not to say that we're necessarily the most expensive, but it's not cheap to renovate a home or to build a custom home. It's a lot more expensive than just going to buy a home from a builder.
Mm-hmm.
However, the builders are building for the mass, right? So they need to keep costs down in order to keep houses affordable for the people that they're trying to build for, right? So they push to some extent some of the code changes because they don't want to change too quickly, because when things change, they have to increase prices because things cost more to them, which ultimately just trickles down to the homeowner who maybe can't afford it. So now they don't make as many sales. I always say, like, I think one of the biggest things that could happen here is that you force people to get energy assessments done of their home, right? So you get everyone who goes to sell their home, you say you have to get an energy assessment done to prove how good or how bad your home performs, just like gas mileage on a car. I think that could have a huge impact, especially in the neighborhoods that have a lot of the homes that look the same. Right now, there's no value put on homes that perform better. And ultimately, the houses that perform better are more comfortable homes, right? We don't necessarily build energy efficient homes. We build comfortable homes, which are by default energy efficient homes. So that's our goal, is to make sure it's comfortable for the people who live in it. And then that's sustainable, because then that's the way they start to realize that, okay, well, they don't have to turn up the thermostat to 24 to make sure that their room at the far end of the house heats up or cools down, depending on the time of year. They can keep it lower because it's more dispersed properly, because we've done it properly.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's if those assessments were mandatory, then all of a sudden those houses that all look the same, that are built beside each other, will have something that differentiates them. When you realize that maybe one house looks the same, but the other one is twice as energy efficient, so your bills are lower and it's more comfortable to live in. So there's no value in that right now, and I think that would have a huge impact on the real estate market.
Yeah. And would you be able to elaborate a little bit more on that comfort? What you mean about comfort at home, and that you build for comfort?
So a lot of people just don't understand building science because they just haven't learned, they weren't interested, whatever it may be. But let me ask it this way. Do you believe that a home needs to breathe?
Yes.
So when you think of a home breathing, what do you think of?
I'm thinking of the spaces like doors and windows and insulation.
Yeah. So one of the things is that we build our houses as airtight as we possibly can. So then people say, well, how does your house breathe? That's not good. You're going to make a sick home. So, well, no, that's not true if you do it properly. So think of your home just like you think of your body. You breathe through your lungs, right? You breathe through your nose. Your nose preconditions the air and filters the air before it goes into your lungs, right? And then you breathe out. You breathe through your skin. You sweat through your skin, right? So you're permeable to some extent, if we use that term, which is a term in the building world. So we want our walls, like our skin, to be as airtight as possible and to be able to allow vapor to travel through them. But we don't want air to travel through them. Instead, we want to control the air that comes into our house, just like we control the air that goes into our lungs. And that is what creates a comfortable home. The insulation is important, but it's not nearly as important as the air tightness. And the best analogy I can give is you think of a jacket. So if you're outside in the winter and it's minus 25 degrees out and you have a big winter jacket on and you have the zipper undone and you face the wind, are you going to be warm? Probably not, right? Because it's not zipped up. You need that jacket to be airtight, or else the insulation does nothing. And that's what we're thinking of. So when we can make sure that insulation we can make sure that the insulation is done properly, but the air tightness is sealed properly, then you can actually reduce your insulation, right? So your jacket a big winter jacket unzipped is not nearly as effective as a just simple windbreaker zipped up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when that's the way we're doing it. And the way we mechanically ventilate our house is, if you want to get into technical stuff, is through what's called an HRV or an ERV. But what it does is that as the air comes into the house, it mixes, it doesn't mix. It goes through a core, which transfers the heat from the outside air to the inside air, vice versa, however you want to look at it. But it doesn't actually mix the air. So it filters the air coming into your house. And as the air is leaving your house, it preconditions the air that's coming in, and then it disperses it through the house. So you always have fresh filtered air coming into your house 24/7.
Mm.
That's the healthiest home that we could build.
Nice. And switching a little bit from the comfort to sustainable materials, what's one of the biggest things that you think that needs to change in terms of that? Like, what are some of the materials? And I know we already talked earlier about different materials and different places. I'm curious, would you be able to talk a little bit about that? What do you see in that space?
Yeah, I think what needs to change once again is us as consumers. We need to choose better. That has a picture of a globe on it and thinking that they did what was best for the environment without really understanding what that globe means. Right. So if you here where we live, there's a company that pulls logs out of the Ottawa River and mills them down and creates hardwood floors out of them. So that is a nice way to get reclaimed wood. Is it more expensive? Yes, but it's better for the environment. It can be. Now, wood products that are, I'm not to say that cutting down trees is bad. I think it's actually a good thing if it's done properly because it helps sequester carbon, but it has to be done in a properly managed way. But what I'm saying is that if you can get it locally, that is good for the environment. If you're buying products that are shipped overseas just because you need to save some money, once again, I understand you need to save money sometimes, but if you can get the local option that is better, that will have the biggest impact on everything that we do. It's kind of like thinking more in terms of your carbon footprint as opposed to just one thing, which is typically saving money a lot of times, unfortunately, when it comes to renovating and building homes.
Yeah, and I've been seeing like lately, and I know that you already told me that you're not an expert, but I've already been seeing how there's all of these different materials that are coming out with hemp and with like mycelia mushrooms. Like, what what do you see in that space, like with all of these new materials that are coming out and the possibilities?
Yeah, well, the possibilities are endless, right? And 3D printing is another thing that's doing a lot of really cool things. Uh, the the biggest, I guess, speed bump around here is going to be the building code. These products need to be approved, right? When, at least here, the inspectors are really strict. So if you're going to install something that's not the norm, they're going to need all sorts of documentation because they don't want to take liability for anything. So if the documentation hasn't been approved, for example, by all the regulatory bodies that are required, it's going to be difficult. So then you'll need an engineer or somebody to stamp it. So it takes time, it takes more money once again, and the product probably costs more because what ends up bringing the price down on products is mass production. And those products aren't in mass production yet. So I think hemp's great because it can be used in all sorts of different ways, and it is starting to become used in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is because people now understand that what hemp is, right? They don't just look at weed, right? So that's becoming quite apparent to people. But there are some things that you still have to look at how people build, and you can't, like, we've been slapping 2x4s together, 2x6s. We're slapping wood together for houses around here for years. You can't just change that overnight. So you have to, if you can somehow work products into that same way of building, then you have a really, really good chance at surviving or growing the product, because it's a whole industry that's being built on this way. We can do it because we're a small company doing, a few projects at a time. But I've spoken to companies for really innovative products and talk to them, but then as we get into the details, I'm just like, I can use this product, but only if the client's willing to pay more for it. And because there's going to be more labor involved, and because they don't, like, we're the ones working with it, right? So they don't understand everything until they really get out and talk to people like us.
Yeah.
And uh, it's not going to be an easy, like anything. I mean, it's not going to be easy. It'll
Mm-hmm.
be worth it in the end,
Yeah.
but it'll take work for any of these products to definitely make a big dent in the market.
Yeah. And switching to, like, during the building process, I walk around a lot and I see whenever there's construction happening, I see the big, like, um what's it called, like the bins, like, just with everything, all of the materials mixed there, even like whatever the builders have been eating or drinking or whatever, everything is like mixed there. There's no separation. And I assume that everything is going to landfill. And like, I wanted to know, is that something that happens over there in Canada as well? And like, is there a way that actually we can change that? Because I've talked to some people here and they're like, it's just easier. We just put everything on one bin and that's it.
So here we do the same thing. However, the bins do get sorted. So we pay extra to get reports. So I have to admit that I've never followed those bins to see if they got sorted properly, but we get reports showing that, this is how much aluminum went, this is how much wood went, and so forth. So those bins may not be going to landfills, right?
Mm,
It's not necessarily beneficial for those companies to continue to fill up landfills either. They can actually save money by recycling. So that's one industry, the recycling industry, that can actually generate a good amount of income. By recycling materials, companies are either saving money or making money on some of these things.
yeah, and I see that also because, like, a lot of times I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, wow, there's so many resources there. Like, there's, as you mentioned, all of this material, sort of that wood, of that metal, and I'm like, someone could use that again. Like, this is part of the, like, for me, like, I talk a lot about the circular economy, and just for, like, stopping that linear model of creating, using, and like then just chucking into landfill, and being able, like, to see everything as like resources, and to, like, if something would go to landfill, like, I think that perhaps one of the ways to discourage stuff like that would be like thinking as resources or paying a little bit extra or things like that. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing because I see sometimes on the big construction sites, and it's like, wow, like, there's so much waste there that I'm a lot of times shocked with that. But anyways, I wanted to talk a little bit about what has been, now that you were saying, like, you're focusing as well on education, and you're doing that through the podcast, you're doing that through videos. Can you talk a little bit about what led you into doing that with those mediums, and how has that been?
Yeah, well, it's been great, and it's been a long process. It didn't happen overnight. We're after doing it over 4 years now, we're really starting to see the benefits of it now, and we've upped our game. Actually, we really started to up it even more when COVID-19 hit. So that's been going really well. Now, what led us into that is probably just through that evolution that I explained at the beginning that we've been going through, right? And understanding myself and business and so forth, and doing all sorts of personal development programs and reading nonstop. You start to realize that now what what the internet's done is that everybody has information at their fingertips, right? So the idea is that's our marketing, right? We don't pay to put I have in the past, it never worked. We don't pay to put anything into magazines or run ads on Facebook or YouTube or social media. For what we do, it doesn't work. For some people, I could see that stuff works. It's a part of the marketing strategy. But for us, we're really doing what's called content marketing. We're putting out content that is our marketing. By me being here on your podcast, that is our marketing. By me interviewing you or somebody else on our podcast, that is our marketing, right? We are just putting out content out there, and the more people see KC or hear the Conscious Builder or whatever it may be, the more that we're going to get eyes on us, and we're going to be seen as the industry experts in conscious building, right? That's the goal, is to be the leader in healthy, comfortable, and efficient home building. Doesn't mean that we have to build every single house. We just want to be seen as the leader in that industry. And the way to do that is to put content out there. So that's what we do.
Yeah, wonderful. And saying all of this, towards like on every episode, I ask a few questions, and I want to ask you these questions, so to make sure that I always remember to ask them. What is the one resource that you would recommend to others, besides, of course, your podcast?
I don't know if there's one particular resource. There's a lot of really good books out there. Like, I'm a fan of reading and listening to podcasts. I've been listening to less podcasts recently just because I've been driving less, because I do all virtual meetings now. But one of the, I guess most of your listeners, are they entrepreneurs? Are they like, where are they from?
I would say that, yeah, like most of them are young-ish people that are looking for some change. So perhaps entrepreneurs, yeah.
Yeah, so I think I'll give a shout out to Vish here. One of the better books I've read recently is called The Business Casual Yogi. Obviously, people can't see this if they're listening to the podcast right now, but this book is actually really great because the Vish Chattery, who wrote it, we had him on our podcast. We've become friends. He's running a program through my wife's meditation studio as well. He used to be an executive, right? He was in that high pressure stress, and he was the one enforcing the pressure. And then he realized he was, it was brought to his awareness. He became conscious of what he was doing, and he found this new world, this Vedic. He teaches a lot of Vedic stuff, lifestyle. So he's he's a really good teacher, and he explains a lot. But it's great because he kind of brings those two worlds together, right? The usual world that we're used to, and this old world Vedic tradition, and he kind of makes it work for today's world, right? So I definitely recommend checking out that book. And we can, if you want, we could even do a little draw on your podcast. And if you want to somehow track who shares this or something like that, we could send them a copy. Just let me know. But you tell me. I have some signed copies from him. So I bought a whole bunch of signed copies from him to give away because I thought the book was so good.
Nice, wonderful. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. And next question. What is your one go-to tip that you share with people?
That right now, I've probably had a lot, and I have a lot of like things that have come. But right now, the first thing that came to mind is that environment is more powerful than willpower. And that goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, is that you are who you surround yourself with, essentially, right? You are, but that goes beyond people, right? That where we need to go with that is we have to think beyond just the people that we're hanging out with, but we have to think about what we're reading, what we're watching, what's our social, what are we going on to our social media feed for? Are we watching the news? I don't watch the news. I haven't watched, I bet you if I turn the news on right now, it'd be the same thing like it was 4 months ago. It's all the same stuff. And if something really bad happens, somebody will tell me, I'll be good. Yeah. It's not affecting me. And by not watching it, I'm actually affected more positively, right? So just being aware of what you're putting into your mind, because that environment that your subconscious mind is taking in is what's happening, is what's going to come out externally, yeah. Right? So your external world is a reflection of your internal world.
Yes, wonderful. Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it. And yeah, I haven't watched really the news except on like specific moments, like whenever the government now has been announcing different things. Like I haven't really watched the news for the past 12 years. Like I was like, I don't want to
Yeah.
be part of that anymore. I don't want to read the
Exactly.
newspapers. Like it's such an interesting way of yeah, like what we're putting into our body, like food, thoughts, people around, everything. Yeah, that's such a good one. Um, what is your latest small act of kindness?
That is a good question. Uh, uh, well, probably, I guess, actually, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, my son biked into a parked car by accident, and he came home. He was obviously upset. And so I went out. I asked him who it was or where it was and what the car looked like. And I went out and found the person to make sure that there was no damage. So I guess I would consider that. I could have just
Yeah,
left it, right? But luckily it was good. But yeah, that would have been what I did yesterday.
yeah, that's a nice one.
That's
Yeah,
probably the most recent one.
that's good.
That's a good question.
That's so nice as well that your son was able to actually like tell you about it and not just like nothing happened.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Nice. And lastly, what is the one thing that you wish that everyone knew?
Uh, Probably what I that tip right is that environment's more powerful than willpower.
Mm,
Because I think deep down we know most of this stuff, and because when we hear it, it's intuitive. A lot of the things that we know are right. Like we don't, as humans, I don't believe that we go out and consciously do bad things. These things that we want to, and it, good or bad is really just a label. Um, but we don't go out and hurt people on purpose, and we don't go out and harm the environment on purpose. And I think when we're aware and when we're conscious of those things, then we start to make those changes like we've been talking about throughout this whole podcast. So I think people know it. They just need to remember it.
yes, definitely. And it's something that I usually say whenever, especially whenever I'm teaching um, about meditation or whenever I'm teaching about ancient knowledge, that I always say that like people, we all know this. There's nothing new. It's like whatever resonates with you is that remembering. It's not that we are
Mm-hmm.
learning anything. We're always just remembering, and it's all of these different keys and these different words and these different energies that are just what we are recognizing as that. Ah, yes, I already know that, but you showed
Yeah.
me that that was there. So yeah, that's a really, really good way of putting it. Awesome. So, Casey, how can people find you online?
The easiest way is to either go to my website, just caseygray.com. That's CASEYGREY.com, or to theconsciousbuilder.com if you want to see what we're doing there with all of the conscious building.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you, Casey, so
Definitely check out our
much.
YouTube channel too.
Yes, definitely. And the podcast. Thank you so much, Casey, for taking the time for being here with us, and all the best for continuing what you're doing with Conscious Builder and putting out that education and getting people to understand a little bit more about what they are doing and the choices that they have. That is what we're doing here with the Conscious Action podcast. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen to this episode. And as Casey was saying before, if you learned something on this episode, please write in the comments, and we'll see about when this episode comes out. We'll see about potentially doing a draw for one of the books. We'll see if that's possible, depending on like shipping and all of that. But yeah, if you learned something, please put it in the comments, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you very much, everyone.